right?
Okay, let's begin. Let's just start on page 21A, which is in the art scroll 21A4. The Gemara says, Kira'a echad, kira'u ashnayim yatzu. If one person read the Megillah, or if two people read the Megillah, the halacha is at the same time, they fulfill the obligation, the yotzeh, the reading of the Megillah. Rashi explains that what's the question here? The question here is that normally, whenever we talk about two people reading something at the same time, you can't hear one or the other, and tre koli lo mishtami, which means two voices are not heard. It's something that we find in many, many different places, this idea. So as an example, if you have two shofars blowing at the same time, you'd think, wow, fantastic, double the mitzvah, right? No, none of the mitzvah, okay? So two voices, two sounds cannot be simultaneously heard. In fact, that's also part of the question of someone who blows a shofar into a pit and there's an echo, okay? So you're hearing the sound of the shofar, but only alongside its own echo. So now, did I hear one? Did I hear the other? Did I hear none? So normally we say two voices are not heard. However, with Megillah, we say Yotzeh. The Gemara says, Tana, Mashe'en ken b'Torah. When it comes to the Torah reading, that's not the case. Two people cannot read the Torah, and you fulfill your obligation. So, only by Megillah. The question is, why? We'll get there in a minute. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in the Braita that the Torah echad, kara ve'echad metargem. Let's say one was reading and one was doing the Tirgum. It's so interesting, because this is how it used to be. Now, for any of you here who are Syrian, you'll know that we actually do this. When do we do this exact thing? Kara echad ve'kara echad targum. The week after someone gets married. Sorry?
I thought Kippur when you have the multiple chazan, but not that.
No, not this. You know, in the week after someone gets married, we say V'Avraham Zaken Babi Yamim. Then the other guy goes V'Avraham Siv, and Avraham got old. You're reading the same pasuk translated into Aramaic. You're reading the targum of that pasuk. So back in the day, every pasuk they would read, you'd read one pasuk. In the beginning, Hashem created the heaven and the earth. Could you imagine that, right? Right? Forget it, what?
That's Shavua Sheva Brachot.
The week of after that. So
a
Syrian minhag, and they read that piece, but they alternate back, forth. So there was at the time that's what they used to do. So the Gemara says, Kara echad koreh v'echad metargem. That's good. Ubevad shelo yeh echad koreh u'shtayim metargemim. You can't have one person reading and two people saying the targum together. Why? If you want to fulfill this idea of Targum, of hearing the Torah with Targum, if you have two people saying the Targum, you're not going to hear it. Kal v'chomer, how much more so that you can't have two people reading the Torah at the same time.
And Targum means translating to whatever is the spoken language of that locale.
That's a good question. Because we've already seen that there are some things that have preference. So English is not the same as Aramaic, because Aramaic had some level of Kiddusha. Same thing we found also, there was opinions that Greek translation was different, ironically because of what we just read this past week in Parashat Noach. Yaft Elohim liyefet. Yefet is the forefather of Greece, and it says V'yishkon be'ohal Shem. He dwells in the tent of Shem, of the Semites. So you see that there was a preferential treatment given to Yefet, even though they were not part of the Jewish people, but there was something special about the original nation of Greek. So this translation, this into the Kiryah, into the reading, into the translation was at least initially into Aramaic. So you can't have two people reading the Tirgum at the same time. Ubinavi, and when it comes to reading from the Haftarah, echad koreh, shnayim metargemim, two people are allowed to read. Why? Since the reading itself is already a d'Rabbanan, so the Tirgum of it is on a lower level. We're not so worried about the fact that you're not going to be able to hear it when it comes to the Haftarah. Ubevad shelo yeh shiyu shnayim korim u'shnayim metargemim. We don't want two people reading Haftarah and two people translating. Why? Because again, at least for the reading part, which is Midrabanan, we want you to read the Haftarah. So we're not gonna allow you to have two people reading. Ubehalel, ube Megillah. But when it comes to Hallel, and when it comes to reading of the Megillah, afilu asara korim, even if there's 10 people reading, v'asara mitargemin, and 10 people doing the tirgum, no problem. Why? So we'll see in just a minute why that's the case, but let's just hit pause for 1 second and go back in time. Why do we have the concept of reading the Haftarah? Where did that come from? The rabbis say something actually amazing. There was a time when the reading of the Torah was actually forbidden by the king. So Jews were not allowed, they were forbidden from reading the Torah. So what they do to get around this, they couldn't read the Torah, it was dangerous, they would get punished. So instead they picked, for each parasha, they picked a portion from the Navi that related to something that went on in that parasha. And then that became what they read instead of the Torah. Because they weren't allowed, they were forced not to read it. After a while, they were able to read the Torah again, okay? But when they started reading the Torah again, they didn't abandon the readings that they used to read instead of the Torah when they were forbidden from reading. That's why we read Haftarah today, okay? So this idea of reading Haftarah is of a lesser commandment, but still, it's enough to say that you can't have someone reading the Haftarah, 2 people reading the Haftarah together. Do you ever hear someone who's not so familiar with the reading, and they have the guy reading quietly alongside them?
Sure.
If you're very close, it's a problem because of this.
But I don't do the words. Unless a guy can't enunciate it, I only give him the
tune.
Yeah.
Right. But if you to read the words, which you hear sometimes, if you're standing close, you can't do that. But if you're sitting 2 rows away, already you can't hear the guy, so it's not a problem. Okay. The Gemara now asks the obvious question. If you can't do it by those because 2 voices can't be heard, then why are you allowed to do it by Hallel and Megillah? My ta'ama, why those specifically are different? Kivan de chaviva yahavi da'atayu v'shamei. Says the Gemara, since they're dear, yahavi, the person pays attention, yahavi da'atayu, he puts his mind to it, v'shamei, and he's able to hear. Normally, tre'koli lo mishtami. When it comes to these, tre'koli is mishtami. Now, there's 2 ways of understanding what the Gemara's answer is. One way of understanding the Gemara's answer is, since it's so dear to him, so what does he do? He focuses in and he listens to one voice. He discerns between the 2 voices and he hears and focuses in and listens to one. By the way, I want you to realize this. If you ever listen to a symphony, to a played together, you just hear it as one sound. But imagine someone says, oh my gosh, listen to that violin solo. So what do? A lot of times you'll see people, they'll close their eyes and you pick it out and you focus and you can literally hear only the violin. Okay? That's Yahavi Datayu Vishami. So one opinion says that since it's Chaviva, it's dear to me, I'm going to pick out one and I'm going to listen to the one voice. The other opinion says no. Even though I'm listening to 2, I'm listening to 2 at the same time and I'm still able to hear. Why? Because I'm focusing enough that I'm able to hear even though I'm hearing 2. What's the halachic nafkamina between these 2 approaches to the Gemara's answer? There's a couple, but let's go with one of them, okay? Let's say one guy is reading the Megillah from a Megillah, one guy's reading the Megillah by heart. According to the first opinion that I could focus in and listen to only one voice, if I'm listening to the voice of the guy who's reading from the Megillah, I'm yotzeh. If I'm listening only to the other guy's voice, he's not reading it from Megillah, we said already. If you're not reading it from the book, so yatzah. According to the other opinion, listening to 2 voices simultaneously, and I'm capable of doing that because I'm focusing in, then I have an extra voice that I don't need, but I have the one that fulfills my obligation. I'll give you another example. What if 2 people are reading from the Megillah, but one of them is Katan? See? Same point. What if one of them is Goy? Same problem. See, again, in each one of these scenarios, if there's someone that you can't be yotzeh from and someone that you could, if it's trekoli mishlo mishtami, and over here it's working because you're listening to both of them, I'm good. I have one within the 2 that's good, and that's good enough. If the point is I'm focusing in on one, so you need to make sure that the one you zoned in on, right, was the one that's going to help you be yotzeh. Okay, let's carry on. The Gemara says, so 2 reasons as well that are given why why it's dear. One opinion is that it's dear because it's rare. It's not something you have all the time, unlike Torah, which is every week. So a person doesn't have as much, love for that mitzvah. Other opinion says, no, it's what you're reading, not when you're reading it. It's the fact that when it comes to Hallel and when it comes to Purim, in each case, you're celebrating great miracles that happened to the Jewish people. So you're actually bought in more because it's something that you like more. Just an interesting thing. If we hold that you can't blow two shofars at the same time, and the Gemara over here is telling you that because it's novel, you're able to distinguish between the two, so shofar is also once a year. But if the reason is because of the great miracle that once occurred, and that's why you're buying it, not because of the novelty or the scarcity of it, then we'd understand why there's discrepancy between shofar where we won't allow and Megillah where we will. Okay? Let's move on. Gemara says, Amar Abaye. Abaye says, Lo shanu ela le'achareya. When we said in the Mishnah actually told us that in a place where there's a minhag to do the beracha, we do the beracha. In a place where there's no minhag to do the beracha for the Megillah, we don't do the beracha. Abaye says, like we already pointed out in the Mishnah, Lo shanu el achareya. We only mention this la'achareya for the beracha that comes after the reading of Megillah. Aval lefanea, but before the reading of Megillah, mitzvah levarech. It's a commandment. There's a mitzvah to make the beracha. The Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Yehuda Amar said in the name of Shmuel, Kol mitzvot kulan, all mitzvot that we have, mivarech alehem. You make a beracha on them over la'asiyatan before they get done. Now this is interesting because I understand that that's the case for all mitzvot deoraita. Why is the Gemara telling it? Maybe Rabbi Yehuda, who said in the name of Shmuel, was only talking about mitzvot from the Torah. So maybe, like the way you thought in the Mishnah, that that making a beracha is a minhag, and therefore in a place that it gets done you should do it, in a place that doesn't get done you shouldn't do it. But over here, this is not a mitzvah from the Torah. So it's a very interesting idea that's very important to know, just globally. That's an idea that we find in Masechet Yevamot. Kol de takun Rabbanan, anything that the rabbis instituted, ke'en deoraita takun. They instituted it like as if it was a biblical commandment. So obviously it doesn't mean that they made a rabbinic commandment biblical. Why? Because there are fundamental differences between a deoraita and a drabanan. What's the most famous one? Anyone know the most famous difference? The most famous difference between a mitzvah deoraita from the Torah and the drabanan is when there's a case of safek. Safek deoraita, I always go to the strict side. Safek drabanan, I always go to the lenient side. So if the rabbis instituted their mitzvah like a deoraita, then that would not be the case. So what it means is that in as much as we can, we fashion a mitzvah drabanan in the same way that a deoraita is made. So therefore, if a mitzvah deoraita, you always make the beracha before you do the mitzvah. So also here, you would do the mitzvah, but you would do the beracha before. There are some notable exceptions. Let's say as an example, you take a lulav. When do you make the beracha? Before, right? Not only before, we're even careful that you take the etrog, you hold the etrog upside down, because if I held it right side up, I'm already holding it. Now making the beracha would be after I held it. So the beracha always needs to be made before you make beracha. But there's a couple notable exceptions. So you make a beracha before you eat. You make a beracha on kiddush, before the kiddush. You make a beracha on any mitzvah, right? Any mitzvah that you're going to do, before.
Ashkenaziyot,
What?
Example.
Sorry?
Ashkenaziyot, for example, when they madlikim nerot Shabbat, they do it before and then they remember the
Except,
Correct.
I was just saying, Ner Chag.
So we do the opposite. There's some notable exceptions. In each case, you have to. There you go, excellent. Convert. When he goes to the mikveh, he makes the beracha after the mikveh. Why? Because before he goes to the mikveh, he can't make the beracha. By the way, you understand that?
Do you understand that?
We have another example also. Was that Stanley?
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful. Good chidush. We also have another example. Where else do we have? Every morning, al netilat yadayim. Why don't you do it before? The answer is because before my hands are not pure, I can't make the beracha. So therefore, netilat yadayim comes after the netilat yadayim. But in every other case, what would it be? You would do it before the mitzvah. Now, Netilat Yadayim is a little complicated because some people say that the mitzvah is not only in the washing,
Also,
it's in the drying. So it's interesting things going on. But there's a few cases, and each case needs to be answered. So the general rule is, when do you make the beracha on a mitzvah? Before you do the mitzvah. In fact, there's some opinions that say, what happens if I forgot to do the beracha and I did the mitzvah already? Let's say you're in Sefirah and you say, Hayom Shlosha Yamim Naomer. Oh, I forgot the beracha. I'm still in. I should be making the beracha. Could you make the beracha now? Too late.
No, but you can the next night.
You can the next night, but that's because the next night is maybe another mitzvah. But why can't I make the beracha? The answer is because the beracha is prior. If you already did the mitzvah, you're not going to do another. You're not going to do it again.
You did it.
Leshev Sukkah.
Yeah.
After the sukkah, you're eating. You forgot to say the beracha of the leshev sukkah. You're still in the meal. You can say it.
Because you're going to eat more. What happens if I'm not going to eat more? I already finished eating. Can't make it.
But if you didn't say birkat hamazon, you can add something else.
But again, because the point is, I'm eating more, so I'm still doing more mitzvah.
I learned that from Allah.
And why is it different? Why? Because with sukkah, it's not that the first bite is a mitzvah and then the rest of it's not.
It's a continuation.
Every bit that you eat is another mitzvah. So therefore, even if I ate already and I have more to eat, there's a lishev on this. Because this is also a mitzvah.
I don't have anything to eat, but I didn't say birkat hamazon. Can you still say because you are still sabea?
No.
Still
No.
digesting the food?
No. Someone made a mistake. They walked into the sukkah. They weren't going to eat because they were eating at home. And they said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, l'shem b'sukkah. And then they sat down. And they got up to leave. I was like, where are you going? He said, l'shem b'sukkah, b'achaz to sit in the sukkah. So we already saw from last week that l'shev, the Gemara brought that l'shev or vayeshev or right, vayeshvu b'nei Yisrael means that they dwelled, they sat, they lived. So there's no beracha just on sitting in the sukkah. You have to eat in order to be able to do it. Okay, let's continue. So the halakha is that all mitzvot, when do you do the beracha? You do the beracha kodem over la'asiyatan, before the practice, before the mitzvah is being done. My mashma, the Gemara says, that's an interesting word, over la'asiyatan. Right? How would you normally say in Hebrew something is before something? Lifnei, kodem. We have different words that intimate that you do it before. Over is a strange word. What does that mean? The Gemara says, "My masha dahai over lishna de'akdumihu." How do you know that it means to go before? Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, "Amar kara vayarot Achimaatz," and Achimaatz ran derech hakikar, along the plain. Vayavor et hakushi, and he passed by the Kushi. What does Kushi mean? Kushi means a person from the country of Kush. Right? Kush is Africa.
Son of Ham.
Yes, exactly. Kush comes from Ham. And that was the first and last time that a Jewish person ran faster than an African runner. We have unfortunately been trailing forever since that moment of Vayaratz Achimaatz. I think maybe that's why the Pasuk felt the need to say it, because it's like, and the only time in history that there was a Jewish guy who was better than Michael Jordan, right? They were going to list that, right? If someone outran, Usain Bolt, we were mentioning that in Tanakh. Let's go. Okay. Abaye Amar Mehacha. So what do we see over there? It says, Vaya'avor et HaKushi, and he passed by the runner from Kush who was going at the time to be able to pass the news of the victory in war back to King David. So he ran first to be able to be the one that was going to tell him. And what does it say? Vaya'avor. And he passed in front of. So you see, Vaya'avor, over means to come before somebody. Abaye Amar Mehacha. Abaye says, no, I have another pasuk. From the pasuk says, V'hu over lifnehem. And he went in front of them. Who's the pasuk? Let's look in the pasuk in the side of the V'hu over lifnehem. The second one, Who's this talking about? This is talking about Yaakov when they're coming before Esav. So you have all of his children, his wife, and Yaakov now goes over and in front of them. Okay, in between his children and his wives and Esav. So again, you see Vayavor, who over. The word over means to come before. V'bait ema, a third opinion says, Me'acha, we could learn it from this pasuk. Vayavor malkam lifnehem, and their king passed in front of them. Hashem birosham, and God was at the head of the entire party. So you see again, this word vaya'avor means to go before. So the question is, you have to ask, why is vaya'avor the term that we're going to use? Why didn't you just use a regular term? If all you meant was in front of, why didn't you tell me a term that we don't know what it means? Normally the word vaya'avor means and he passed.
And why the Gemara doesn't bring the pasuk? Let's say, for example, Vayavor Hashem al panav vayikra.
Because there's no proof from the pasuk about what vaya'avor means.
Vayavor Hashem al panav vayikra.
Yeah, but who said that means he came in front of him? Maybe, as an example, Moshe is here. In fact, maybe God passed from here to here. So maybe vaya'avor means he passed before him.
Not he overtook him.
Not he overtook him. Not he was behind and came first. So we need to prove from the context of the pasuk that over means to go in front of, before.
Maybe not in the obviously not in the how do you say that? In the literal way, obviously not in the literal that he passed over him, but by Avor Hashem al panav, like he put his midot first, and then he says all of the 13 midot.
You're giving a pshat. We need a proof from the literal interpretation. Why? Because we're trying to say that that's what the word means. So you could say it might mean this or it might mean that, but if it's not obvious that that's what it means, then you have no proof. Also, by the way, over la socher, what does that mean? When you have money, right? Over la socher. We find over, same word. What does over means?
Return.
Over la socher means that any socher would use this money. That means it's money that is a currency that any socher would accept. That's the money that Avraham paid to Ephron for Ma'arat HaMachpelah. So over la socher means like it passes. But it doesn't mean it passes in front of. You see? Otherwise, one might have interpreted, and this is the dangerous part of using this word. I think that's why the Gemara is going to such pains. You could have understood that over means to pass, which means that when you say a beracha, it's while you're passing the mitzvah, which would mean that the time to make the beracha is in the middle of doing the mitzvah. So you could have actually understood it to mean something other than what it means.
Get a mouthful of water in the mikveh.
As an example. So there might be certain things that were impossible, and like the Gemara always says, En dan in efshar mishi efshar. You don't learn something which is possible from something which is not possible, right? Like as an example, let's say you have a door that the door takes up the entire door frame. Normally you put the mezuzah in the door frame, right? What happens if the door fits the entire frame? So you put a mezuzah that the door will knock it right off. Or a swinging door. Yeah. Where do you put the mezuzah?
On the front.
Tefach samuch lapetach. Within one tefach from there. So you say, so that means that I could always put up a mezuzah, not in the door frame, but on the front of it. No. En dan in efshar, mishi efshar. So in the case of the mikveh, obviously I would have no choice. But the case would be, so you might have thought it means that. So therefore, what do? We explain that vayavor means that it came in front of. All right? So if that's the case, why didn't we just use a word that has no ambiguity? And why didn't we just use a word which is not this? So the commentators explain that if you said the word lifnei or kodem, if you didn't say that, it might mean that you could say it 3 hours before. Vaya'avor means, like by Yaakov Avinu, if you're going to defend your wife and children, he didn't come all the way to Esav, leaving all the space between him and them. What happens if the archers are going to shoot arrows? He came in front of them, but he stayed as close to them as was possible. That illustrates that the beracha is supposed to be said right before the mitzvah, right? And without any hefsek. Famous joke about the guy who was very strict with mitzvot. You know that joke? Brisker guy. He's walking down a side alley where Hazid, an Arab, comes and grabs him from behind and puts a knife to his throat. And he says, I'm going to kill you. The guy says, please. He says, I'm a very religious Jew. I'm very strict on mitzvot. He says, please, could you let me say the beracha on dying for Kiddush Hashem? The Arab says, sure, no problem. The guy says, Baruch ato Hashem Elokeinu melech oilom asher kiddishonu b'mitzvoiso v'tzivonu. To die al Kiddush Hashem, which there is a beracha. He said, al Kiddush Hashem. Anyway, the Arab, by now, all of a sudden he gets scared off. He sees police coming. He starts running away. The brisker starts chasing him. He's like, he. Okay, so over la asiyata means there can't be a hefsek. There can't be a hefsek. There can't be hefsek between a beracha and doing the mitzvah. Okay, let's carry on.
On Pesach, when we say that Hashem passed over the house, to use Vayavor there?
I was answering him before that vayavor doesn't prove that it means in front of.
No, not on Pesach, the Vayavor, not Vayavor that we say.
Which vayavor on Pesach? Vayavor Hashem al Eretz Mitzrayim. It doesn't say it's in front of. He passed over Egypt.
Okay.
We specifically need the word to mean in front of. Yeah. And now what we added is that it needs to be in front of, but right in front of. And that's why we go through the rigmarole of Vayavor instead of Lifnei or Kodem. Okay. The Gemara says, okay, if that's the case, so you just told me that the Berachot of before the Megillah, those are hard-coded in. You can't take those off. Those are according to everybody. That's not a minhag. That's the halakha. What you're talking about is that there's some communities that have a minhag not to say the beracha after the reading of the Megillah, and some do. The Gemara says, what's the beracha of before that you're telling me is 100% in, and what's the beracha of after that you're telling me is dependent on the minhag? Lefanei ma'im varech, what does the person make a beracha? The Gemara answers, Reb Sheshes bekatriza ikla lekamed Rav Ashi. Rav Sheshet from this place came in front of Rav Ashi, ubarich, and he made a beracha menach. What does menach mean? Menach is an abbreviation. So if you look at Rashi, Rashi says, what is menach? Right, the middle, maybe 5 lines down, the narrow lines. Al mikra Megillah and she'asa nisim v'she'echianu. Okay? So those 3 berachot, right? Like Megillah, nisim, and now you would have thought that she'echianu is a shin, right? But with chayenu. Okay? So we're using the actual topic, the concept. So you're blessing Hashem for the Megillah, for the miracle, and for life. Okay? Chayenu. So he made the beracha, these 3 berachot of menach. Le'acharei ma'im varech. The Gemara asks, what are the berachot of afterwards? The Gemara answers, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Ha'el, or without ha'el, depending on how you nusach. Harav et rivenu, that God fights our fight. V'adan et dinenu, judges our judgment. V'anokem et nikmatenu, when he takes our vengeance. V'anifran lanu mitzarenu, and he pays back from our enemies. V'amishalem gemul, and he who pays back l'chol oivei nafshenu, for all those that are enemies of our souls. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you Hashem, anifra liYisrael mikol tzarehem, he who pays back for the Jewish people from all of their pain and their suffering, right? And then we actually add Ha'el HaMoshiach, that's how we say. The Gemara says, Rava Amar, and Rava adds Ha'el HaMoshiach. So when you say that beracha, people don't realize that is this Gemara, right? Ha'el HaMoshiach is, according to Rava, Ha'el HaMoshiach, and that's how we say the beracha. Amar Rav Papa, Hilkach Nimrinu, therefore we say, Litarvayu, therefore we say, according to both, Baruch atah Hashem, and Efrad Yisrael Mikol Tzaraim, Ha'el HaMoshiach. May it be Hashem's will that all of those words that we just said in the beracha should come true today, in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Iran, Iraq, in Syria. All the enemies of the Jewish people should come to a conclusion immediately.
Why did establish this bracha for other times of Tzara, and we were...
Because this is not for a time, this is for the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah.
Okay, so say that for the mitzvah of Adlakan Nerot Chanukah.
No, there's no, we have it, each one has its own beracha.
You have the beracha before, but
yeah.
Beracha lefanea, tagid beracha
so there's no beracha acharya, and this beracha acharya is the minhag. That's what the Mishnah is telling you. This beracha, there were some places where they didn't say it because it wasn't their minhag.
To establish that minhag also for other.
You can't ask a question why they didn't establish a minhag, because the ones that didn't have that minhag didn't establish it. So in other words, it wasn't a chiyuv, but some places had the minhag to be able to do that, right? But not everybody had it. I think there's a fundamental difference between Chanukah and Purim as an example. Purim is the only example that we have of a decision to eradicate men, women, and children, every single Jew in the entire world. You can't compare that to Chanukah. Chanukah was an oppression, right, etc., etc. They tried to get the Jewish people to stop being as Jewish, right? It was a whole different ballgame. With Purim, it was a decision to annihilate the Jewish people, which could have come to fruition. Could have completely actually taken place. So therefore they institute the beracha. Now what's interesting is, again, like we said, that's a minhag. What always bothered me about this Gemara is, let's go back for 1 second. The beginning of the beracha, the Gemara said that, what's the beracha lefanea? What's the beracha before it? Right? Al mikra Megilla, Janisina Avotenu, and Shechianu. Okay? That instituted. Clear? I have one problem. That's not a minhag, right? Like the Gemara started off by telling us. That's halacha. Every mitzvah has berachot over la'asiyatan beforehand. Well, if that's such a prevalent thing, right? If that was instituted in halacha, and that was what everybody did, how is the Gemara going to bring a proof from Rav Sheshet Mikatrazia, who went in front of Rav Ashi? Everybody was doing this. This should be in the Mishnah. This should be Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. This should be everybody. Remember, when is the story of Purim? The story of Purim is pre the second Beit HaMikdash. So this should be in the Mishnayot. It's strange to me that if the Gemara is saying, if it's a minhag in both places, I understand. This rabbi instituted this minhag, fine. Or this rabbi instituted the beracha, and they followed the beracha that he instituted. Because remember, these berachot would need to be instituted by the Chachamim. So I can understand, you're telling me who made the beracha. But Rav Sheshet is one of the Amoraim. What were the Tanaim doing? And why don't we have a proof from that? That always bothered me about this Gemara. I don't have a good answer. I don't have a good answer to that question. Okay? Now, let's continue. B'sheni b'chamishi, on Monday and on Thursday, b'shabbat b'mincha, and on Shabbat in the afternoon, Kurim b'shilosha. We read 3 aliyot. Now, the Gemara says, okay, 3 aliyot, hay shilosha, kineged mi. Why are we having 3 readings? Why can't you just have one person read the Torah? The Gemara answers, Amar Rav Asi. Rav Asi teaches us. Now, just remember, where does the whole idea of the Sheni v'Chamishi reading come in the first place? So we're now talking about how many people go up to the Torah on Monday and Thursday. But why are we reading it all on Monday and Thursday? Why are we reading it all? So there's a takana that Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to make sure that the Jewish people would not go 3 days without reading Torah, without having Torah in their life. So what did he do? He instituted, you have reading on Shabbat. Now, you have Shabbat to Shabbat 7 days. So Shabbat, Sunday, Monday, right? 2 days. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday on the 3rd day. Okay? Thursday, Friday, Shabbat. Again, you have Shabbat in the reading. So you don't go 3 days without reading. But that doesn't tell you that the reading that you have needs to be divided into 3 people going up to the Sefer. So the Gemara says, where does that come from? The Gemara answers, Amar Rav Asi, Kineged Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim. Fascinating. So all of us think Kohen Levi Israel, right? That's what we think. Where does that come from? Gemara says, Rava Amar, Kineged Kohen Levi Israelim. It's amazing. Something that's so much a part of what you know. Kohen Haoleh Yamodecha. That's Rava from this Gemara. Okay? Now, according to the first opinion, according to Rav Asi, would a Kohen go up first? It's not about Kohen Levi Israel. So you shouldn't have Kohen Levi Israel, right?
The order. No.
There's no order. Actually, Mikal Adin, everybody can go. There doesn't have to be Kohen Levi Israel. That's the minhag. אבל Mikal Adin, גם כן, if you have a Kohen on the בית הכנסת, גם כן ישראל יכול לעלות first.
Not really. They asked the Kohen to leave the room. You have to ask permission. You have to ask permission. Why? Why do you have to ask permission? Now, it's true that Israel could go up. Let's say Chamuvadia came, and for whatever reason we wanted to give him Kohen. You're allowed to give him Kohen. But you're supposed to ask permission, or you're supposed to ask the Kohen to go out so he could take the Aliyah. Right? We also know that Israel could get the Aliyah for Kohen, because what happens if there's no Kohanim? What happens if Harry Towel slept in that day? And there's no Kohen.
It happened today.
I did not mean to call you out, by the way. Oops. You did that yourself. I did not do that. I feel like I don't want to put on YouTube. Do we need to edit this out and post? Okay. He just went to the other minyan. That's what he means. Okay. So guys, this is very important because I think it's crucial to understand this. According to Rav Asi, you wouldn't have a Kohen go up. It would be whoever.
But it can't be
Except.
Cannot be Levi.
Why not?
A Levi can be first. A Levi can
Levi
be second if the first one is not a Kohen, because you can say that one is a Kohen.
A Levi can't go up instead of Kohen.
Yeah.
But there's not because he
Levim
can't,
become Kohen.
for a different reason.
No,
No,
Kohen
we say
become Levi, not Levi become
we say Kohen become Levi or Yisrael become Kohen. We don't do Levi become Kohen.
The Levi would
No, but the
be
Levi also can go.
Ashkenaz
But
do.
it's not that he can't. Technically, he can.
He can.
By Ashkenazi, maybe.
But there's a side reason why we don't want to do that, so that he shouldn't be confused and people will think.
Kohanim after each other?
Sorry.
Because we wouldn't be able to call 3 Kohanim in a row if you don't have the difference between Kohen, Levi, Israel.
No, technically that wouldn't be a problem. The reason why remember, there's two different things going on here. One thing is who could go up. A second thing is, do we have side issues for other reasons that create reality? So as an example, we don't call 2 Kohanim up one after the next. You know why? Because we don't want people to say, oh, you know why they called up a second Kohen? Because the first guy is illegitimate. His mother's a halal. He doesn't have yichus. Maybe he's not legit Kohen. So because of the fact that people might say that, so we don't do a practice. That doesn't mean that guy can't have that aliyah. It means that for another reason, we don't do it. Okay?
You call a Levi after a non-Kohen.
Let's not get, we're going to get too off track because that's not our Gemara here. Okay? But what I do want to point out is, even according to Rav Asi, you still might have a Kohen go up first. Why? If it's not Kohen Levi Israel. Because there's always a halakha. Kohen notel chelek barosh. If let's say we're sitting at the table and we have steak at the table, right? Really, the halakha is everyone is supposed to say, pass the steak to Harry, and Harry's supposed to take the first piece.
I won't sleep in for that one.
That's halakha. So the idea that a Kohen takes first is for everything. Let's say we're washing Netilat Yadayim. There's a Kohen. What are we supposed to do? Kohen's supposed to go first. So even according to Rav Asi, that the reasoning was not Kohen Levi Israel, it still could be the case that the Kohen would get the first aliyah. Okay, is that clear? All right. However, but that's not the purpose of why. It's not the purpose of why it was instituted. Now, what does this mean? You have 3 Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. What does that mean? Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. 3 because the Yankees won the World Series 3 years in a row. What? You just finding random things with the number 3? What is that? What are we saying? I think the answer is that what we're communicating is that the process of studying Torah, what we are communicating that there's 3 layers of Torah that need to be studied. So if we instituted this idea of having Torah reading once every 3 days, a person can't go 3 days without learning. So we would want to remind the person that there's a lot to learn. So in order to be able to do that, we did Torah Nevi'im Ketuvim. That's an example. The second idea, Amar Rava, there's 3 things. Why Kohen Levi Israel? So you could understand that on a surface level, that we wanted every part of the Jewish people to have an aliyah to Torah, but there's also a deeper Kabbalistic understanding here. What do we say with regards to the Torah? We say that the word Yisrael, which stands for the Jewish people, is Yesh, Shishim, Ribo, Otiyot, La Torah, which means that there are 600,000 letters in the Torah. Every Jew is represented in the Torah. Okay, you have a letter in the Torah for you. There's different opinions. What does it mean? Some people say it incorporates the letters that are written and also the spaces in between, because there's not 600,000 letters, but the letters with the spaces, they say, which also create shapes. That's what people don't understand. Let's say you have an aleph and then you have a bet. So the bet goes like this and the aleph goes like that. That means that there's a white space that is the shape of the space between an aleph and a bet. If this was an aleph and that was a resh, it would be a different shape. If this was an aleph and that would be a tzadi, it would be a different shape. So there's 600,000 letters and spaces. White fire and black fire is how it's called in the parlance of Chazal, okay? Which represent every Jewish person. So therefore, when we're reading from the Torah, we call a Kohen Levi Israel because we're trying to indicate that every faction, every part of the Jewish people is part of the Torah, has a place in the Torah, is connected to the Torah. The Gemara continues. When Rav Simi was explaining, he explained the Braita, and pochatim miyud pesukim bet hakneset. A person does not read less than 10 pesukim. Vaydaber oleh min haminyan. And when you say the beginning, Vaydaber Moshe lemor, that's not like filler pasuk, so you need 10 more. That also counts as part of the 10. Hani asara kineged mi. So when you say 10 pisukim and Vaidaber ole min haminyan, hani asara kineged mi, who do they represent? Now, I just want to point out, look at Rashi for 1 second. Vaidaber ole, you see that? Rashi? Vaidaber ole min haminyan?
10 lines down in the narrow.
Yeah. Vaidaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, af al pi she'en lelmod menu klum. There's nothing that I'm learning specifically from this pasuk. Because it's like the setup for what's going to come next. I have that pasuk 100 million times.
Just that it's from Moshe.
So it's telling you, it's like authenticating, it's telling you that this is where it came from, and this is a comment, what's coming next is Hashem's words to Moshe, right? But in a scenario like that, so what do they represent? Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Keneged Asara Batlanin Shebeit HaKnesset. It represents the 10 people that are Batel in Beit HaKnesset. This does not mean 10 people who are doing nothing in Shul. Right. Batlanim doesn't mean someone who's being Betil Torah. It means exactly that they nullify everything else, they're not doing everything else, and they are doing this. Okay? The Gemara continues. Okay, we have 1 more minute. Rabbi Yochanan says, Keneged asara ma'amarot, shebahen nivra olam. It's Keneged, the 10 utterances that Hashem created the world with. Sorry? Rabbi Yosef says, Keneged aseret adibrot. It references the 10 commandments, shene'emru leMoshe b'Sinai, that was said to Moshe on Har Sinai. So the 10 Pesukim are Keneged Aseret HaDibrot. The Aseret HaDibrot people think is the holiest. It's not any more holy than any 10 Pesukim in the Torah. So it's Keneged Aseret HaDibrot. The third opinion is, no, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Keneged Asara Ma'amarot, Shebahen Nivra Olam. It's Keneged, the 10 utterances that Hashem said when he, like Vayihi Or. Hainiu, the Gemara says, Vayomer de Bereshit, the Vayomer of Bereshit, that starts the creating of the world and carries on through there. The Gemara says, what do you mean? Hani Tish'aninu, there's only 9. The Gemara says, Bereshit nami ma'amarhu. When the Pasuk says Bereshit, Bara Elokim, that was also God saying something. And how do you know that that's the case? Dechsiv bidvar amunai, like it says, with the word of God, shamayim na'asu, ruach piv kol tziva'am, which means that the beginning of the beginning was also God saying, let there be a beginning. So even though there's 9 cases of, and God said, let there be light, and God said, let the earth form, and let the waters recede. God said, let the animals come and the shetzutz, even though there's 9 of those, there's one in the beginning, which is the pasuk of the utterance of Bereshit, which gets everything started. Okay, now the Gemara is going to continue on. We'll continue from next week, but I do want to revisit exactly this last piece of the Gemara. So we'll start again with revisiting what the Gemara means with regards to the Vayidaber Hashem Moshe Lemor. But at least on the surface level, 10 Pesukim represents either Aseret HaDibrot, or it represents the 10 utterances of creation of the world, or it represents, like the Gemara's first answer, the 10 Batlanim that are studying Torah in every community that you need to have people studying Torah all day long. Baruch Adonai Le'olam.